Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our series, next episode in our webinar series. This one is titled Using On-Demand Transit Data to Plan Public Transit. And with us today is the pioneer in Ontario of full-size bus deployment for on-demand software, Paul Buck, who's the transit manager from the city of Belleville. Welcome, Paul. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Jeremy. Anytime. I love to talk transit, and especially on demand. So I'm looking forward to this.
Well, it's great to continue that conversation because like when we first started talking many years ago about the concept, I think it was probably over 3 years ago. I think it was actually 3.5 years ago that this topic came up, where we kind of thought about ideas on how to improve the efficiency of night service. And now here we are. You've been running on demand for close to 2.5, I guess over 2.5 years now, right?
Yep. Yes, we started in September 2018. Yes.
So I have some basic kind of summary slides that I'm going to share on the screen with folks, just so we can use that as a bit of a guidance for the conversation. But I'm going to have to ask to get permission to share my screen. So while I'm getting permission, the whole concept today that we want to talk about is how to use data. And so, I guess the first question is, what data did you look at, or what caused you to want to switch, your traditional fixed route service in the evening to an on-demand service? What data was telling you that you had to make some changes?
Yeah, we initially launched our evening service so that we could accommodate the request from our industrial park employers to get people back and forth to work in a timely manner. So we met with the employers. We found out what their shifts were like, or when the individuals were going to have to report to or leave from work. A key part of that conversation and the data that we didn't have at the time was where everybody was going to go to. Where were we knew half the equation in where they were going to and where they were coming from at certain times, but we didn't know where they wanted to travel to from the workplace. So what we started to do was look at how we could get, initially with our fixed route service, how could we cover a good portion of the city of Belleville with only half the equation known, and get people home in a timely manner. And then we had to look at what our operating costs were, that type of data. What was it going to cost us, and how could we do it efficiently, and make the service work. So that's the information that we had when we first started our fixed route service, to get people to and from the industrial park, from late night work and shift work. And it wasn't enough.
So tell us a little bit about that. What was happening with your fixed route? You used traditional means to try and define a fixed route network, and then was it slammed with ridership, or what were you seeing?
No, traditionally when you start to set up a fixed route service, it's usually brought on by growth in an area or expansion into an area, and you use the data that's available for that area. You look at the population density. You look at the residents that are in that area, the demographics, and you can kind of determine whether you're looking at students or people that are working in that area, or seniors that need to get out and utilize the public transit to get to different various locations around the city, and you kind of know the times of day that they're going to travel. What was unique about starting this service was that it was at the request and popular request of the employers, to justify and be able to supply a workforce to that area. So when we sat down to look at it, we weren't necessarily able to determine a lot of that data to start up with. We just knew that we had a potentially large population of employees that needed to move back and forth around the city, but we didn't know where to. So when we launched the service, being a 16 bus fleet at the time, we only had one type of vehicle to utilize to set it up. So we went with our full size 40 footers, We set up a large route around the city that we could flex off of and back onto in order to try and accommodate as many people as we could, and cover as much city as we could. And it was not heavily utilized. I think at our peak we averaged about 35 or 40 passengers a night, running a 1 hour fixed route service with two buses to get a 30-minute headway. And it was truly inefficient, not overly customer friendly. We were getting told regularly that people could walk home quicker than the bus could get them there. So we were open to something better, or some way to make it better so that we could um, get more people on the bus, and make it a viable alternative.
So so then we started, talking to Pantonium, and it took us some time to get, to the point where we were ready to deploy this platform, our on-demand platform for you. I think it was about 18 months before we could even, get off the ground, and get launched. But when you're going to put an on-demand service, what did you tell the public? What data did you give the public about, what was going to happen for their service?
It was very interesting because it was completely unique. We didn't have anything like that, and there wasn't any place that we could say um, this service is going to be just like that service. It's going to be that way. So the data we had to give the public was more so a removal of data. We had to let them know that they no longer needed to know um, when the schedule was. They no longer needed to know a route. They didn't need those numbers or that information anymore. What they needed to know was how to utilize the app, how quickly we could be there, how convenient it was going to be for them. It was almost like a complete change of data for the customer. And then once the service launched, it was the data that they started to collect for us, how quickly the bus could be there when they requested it, the fact that they didn't have to transfer, and that they could request it ASAP, and their wait time was 9 minutes as opposed to an hour, and their travel time was 9 to 12 minutes as opposed to an hour again. So it was just a matter of a complete data change in what they were doing and how they were doing it.
And as with every change, I mean, it takes time for people to adopt it. But in your case, we saw some things that we weren't expecting, right? And it was almost like a reverse of what our hypothesis was about this service. Tell us a little about what happened.
We absolutely did. We were very careful when we first started to work together with Pantonium and start the service up, that we kept regular information out to the public of our progress and what the service was going to be, because it was incredibly different than what they were used to. So, as progressive as I thought we were at the time, we still launched a conservative service. We only operated the two buses that we initially had, and I was so convinced that this was going to take time to build and grow. The soft launch kept one bus on the fixed route, and we ran one bus on demand. And within the first 36 hours, we had over 250 registered riders that wanted to use the service and were booking the service. So within 3 days, our soft launch turned into a full launch, and we were running the entire service fully on demand. And we're having issues keeping up with the demand within the first week of service. And again, started to have to look really close at the data we were collecting to find out how we could make it better before we started just throwing buses at it and making a quick resolve. We started to look at the data. Where were the people coming from? Where were they going to? What time during the service were they moving around? And where could we best deploy or utilize our equipment to make the trips viable? What we found out very, very quickly was that the fixed route that we had initiated to cover the entire city um, missed 75% of the people that were using the on-demand. We thought we had good coverage of the city that was going to allow riders to get to and from work. What we found out after we launched, utilizing the data that we were able to collect, was that people wanted it for a lot more than getting back and forth to work. They were using it for any number of things, and without the data that we had beforehand that we were able to collect through the Pantonian product, now we can start to pinpoint and target service times, service areas, and provide that better service, better customer service to get riders on board. And it paid off. We went from 35 to 40 passengers a night to 350 to 400 passengers a night in very short order, less than 3 months of starting their service. We saw just astronomical growth.
Yeah, I remember we saw some interesting patterns, right? Because off to the west was Loyalist College, which is a higher educational facility, but a fixed route system, on a schedule would continue to go out there on a fixed schedule. Every half an hour, you're going by Loyalist College to pick up the students. But what about when they have break, or what happens when school's not in session over the summertime? I remember that we were looking at that data and how many trips you'd make out west with the mileage calculations, and how on-demand just naturally adapted, because if people aren't requesting rides, it wasn't going that direction. I think I can't remember the exact calculation that we have, but there was significant mileage savings just from that. That one thing alone, right, was something that was really interesting to me. The second interesting piece, I think, and it was the change in ridership patterns by hour, right? Because it seemed like there was different populations moving around at different times in the evening, and you could never adapt to that with a fixed route. You'd almost have to run a ridiculous amount of vehicles in order to capture that. And I thought that it was really interesting to see how different segments were using the service for different reasons by time of day almost.
Oh, absolutely. We could almost see the ebb and the flow of passenger volume in Belleville as it was occurring. We could see when certain areas of certain businesses were closing or ending service for the day, or we'd see a spike at a time when the mall started to close, or when the theater was letting out, or if there was a big event in Belleville. And that gave us real-time data and cyclical data, so that we could start to plan how the service, what type of service we were going to pinpoint on any given day or time, knowing what was happening around the city. We started to look at a lot of key indicators, such as revenue miles versus non-revenue miles. And with the on-demand, we were up to almost like a 98% revenue operating service, as opposed to was below 40% with the fixed route, because the fixed route bus was driving around on a fixed schedule with no passengers or very few passengers. With the on-demand, it was only going if there was a demand or a passenger requested it. So a lot of our service started to see more revenue generation or more revenue service hours. And that was a key point when we started to look at how do we properly deploy our equipment to meet demand, so that we could respond to the peaks and the valleys of service requests. And with the data through the on-demand, we could see a day or more ahead, so we could start to plan that service. But even in real time, as something's happening on the street, our supervisors had the ability to monitor it and adjust to meet that demand. We could pull a bus out of service if it was quiet, with zero impact on the client on the street. They still got their bus within 9 minutes. They still had a 12-minute ride time. They weren't aware that we moved service, because we didn't have to adjust the schedule. We didn't have to notify the public, and vice versa. If we saw there was a big event going on in town and we knew we were going to have a spike in demand at the end of that event, we could add a bus or two for that period of time, just to alleviate any of the bottlenecking that was occurring. And that was all as a result of having that data available and present for us at our fingertips.
So, but it's so going back to, as we headed into, November, December of 2018, and you've got a few months under your belt, you're running pretty tight on available vehicles, right? And it just happened to be a municipal election, so budget cycles were a little bit extended. So, but instead of, we knew that we had to get more vehicles out on the road to meet the demand of the ridership. And a common way to do that would be, just add X number of vehicles for the service hours, right? That would be a typical way you would do it in a fixed route environment. So talk about what we were able to do because of watching demand patterns. You didn't have to go to council and ask just for a blanket request for extra buses. You could be a little bit more precise, right? So.
Absolutely. Yeah, like you said, because it was an election year, and we had a substantial number of councillors that were up for re-election or were not returning for re-election. We didn't have the ability to just go to council and ask for an additional budget. But what we were able to do even before that process was use the data that was provided for us and sit down with a team from Pantonium and start to look at how we could pinpoint where the pinch points were and how we could alleviate them. Using the data that we collected, we could adjust our customer ride time on board the vehicle. We could look at how we could adjust the parameters of the program to either open that window of opportunity for when a customer booked or close it up a little bit so that if we knew there was a place such as Walmart or a business that was ending their service or ending their day at 10:30 at night, rather than have 13 people try to book a bus within a 15-minute window of opportunity and kind of hog the service, as it were, or capture all the service. Working with the team from Pantonium and using the data, we were able to open that window of opportunity so that the bus wasn't trying to return that often. It would group those calls together into one pickup, depending, of course, on where they were going within the city, and allow us to utilize the rest of our resources elsewhere so that people in the other parts of the city were still getting their regular service, but that one location wasn't utilizing all of the resources. And then when we got that data, we collected it all together, and we knew exactly then what we needed resource-wise and budget-wise to make the service work. So we were able then to put together the report to take to our transit advisory committee and give them specifics and give them details about where we could pinpoint the service to make it better. And we're able to work around and get the service improvements made without having to go through a significant budget issue. It could all be done with utilizing the data to pinpoint the issue and present the problem and present the solution and be able to do it with the resources that we already had. And it just made it a lot easier. Finance loved it. The fact that we could fix the service and fix some issues that were resulting strictly by using the data and pinpointing our resources, it was an outstanding win for us.
Yeah. So one thing that comes to mind is how popular the story was. It really grabbed a lot of attention, right? It even kind of spawned a bit of transit tourism to Belleville, right? To see, how the service was operating and come see they call it the Uberbus, right? We got that CBC national news coverage. And just because maybe we didn't cover it, but for folks on the phone that aren't familiar with Belleville service, it is running on demand for the entire city in the evenings, covering 327 stops, I guess. So and a rider could pick any point, origin or destination. So it's a bit different than what you would see in a microtransit deployment where you might carve up the city into different service areas to do maybe more of a first mile, last mile. This one actually allowed riders to choose point to point anywhere in the city of Belleville. So I think that's what maybe got people's attention, that it was such a different way of providing public transit was not considered all that interesting or sexy, right? It was more, kind of get the service on time, let the buses roll, and that type of thing. But I think that this one really captured people's imagination on what is possible, and maybe talk a little bit about the attention that got for Belleville.
Completely unexpected. We thought we were launching a service that was going to allow us to be more efficient and help out our needs within the city of Belleville. We didn't look at it as that unique. It was at the time. We just thought it was another way of being able to provide a service. What resulted, though, was incredible attention within a very short period of time. Um, I went from a transit manager for a little while to a completely public relations and media person. We were drawing attention from. I did radio shows in Australia, Mumbai, India, um, all kinds of television requests and magazine and article and stories, all because of all of a sudden transit went from something that the agency designed and the agency planned and the customer worked around to a service that the agency had full control over budget and operating costs, but the customer had complete control over their trip and their travel. Um, they could they could tell us when they wanted to go, where they wanted to go, and when they wanted to go, and we were there to do that. It was a completely different way of doing business. And ideally, from the operational side of things, is it like I said, it allowed us to maintain complete control. We decided the hours of service that we were going to run and the number of resources that we were going to apply to it. And because this service allowed us to utilize all of our own infrastructure, there really was not a lot of additional cost because we were using our own buses, we were using our own staff, and we were using our own regular bus stops. So for us, it was a very easy decision to implement and try because it's everything we already had, and it also allowed us to be that much more flexible, as we said earlier, when we see ridership increasing or decreasing, and we have that cyclical change of seasons for colleges, for high schools, for summer travel, winter travel. When before you used to have different schedules planned for different times of the year, with the on-demand service, it automatically makes that adjustment for you. It only goes where it's needed, so there's no requirement to add or remove schedule. You can add or remove buses to meet the demand or meet the or lack of demand, and the customer is not aware. All they are confident in is that they've requested a bus at this time to go to this place. It's there and it does exactly what they need. So it's the best of both worlds for both the passenger and your operating agency.
We have a question from one of the attendees, Anna, about night service ridership. Did it essentially level off? Did you see it kind of taper, get to a normal kind of steady state, or were things kind of still a bit variable? And when did you see that happen?
It took approximately 6 months for it to truly level off. We just kept seeing it climb and increase. We went from, like I said, 35 or 40 riders a night to 350 or 400 a night. And that continued to grow and see some ebb and flow for 6 months. Now we started to level off where we were seeing a regular between 300 and 320 riders a night until, of course, COVID hit. And we did see a slight drop, but our on-demand service, because it was predominantly there in the evening for what turned out to be essential workers working in our industrial area we have Kellogg's and we have Procter and Gamble and a number of companies that maintained essential workers, that it actually stayed very, very steady even through the COVID pandemic. I think we dropped, some of our numbers dropped below 200, but not like we saw across the rest of the service. That ridership, because we saw somewhat of an expansion because through the pandemic, like everybody else, we went to rear door boarding and we stopped collecting the fares, and we really promoted that essential worker ride for the people that needed to go there. So that service actually saw a bit of an uptick because we were there for the essential workers and we could be relied upon and it was convenient for them. It was easier than being able to, or having to take their own vehicle and find parking, because we were able to target that specific market.
So talking about COVID, I mean, in 2019, Belleville broke ridership records, right? You crossed the million ridership per mark, in 2019, and then 2020 hit, and COVID came along. You had on-demand service available to you. What did you do when the COVID restrictions came into play?
Yeah, when COVID-19 hit and the first lockdown came around, overnight, we lost 94% of our ridership when everything closed. So we started to immediately look at the fact that we knew we still had to provide service. We knew we had essential workers in Belleville that we had to look after and get back and forth to work. Belleville is kind of a regional hub in the Quinte area. We have the regional hospital. We have a number of large employers, food service employers. So we knew we were still going to have some demand. So we reached out to the employers in the area and said, okay, what are you anticipating to maintain for your workforce, and what are your start and end times? And we quickly realized that we were still going to have to operate our service from 5 a.m. till midnight to be able to accommodate all the workers. But we knew we weren't going to need our full service. So it was a really easy decision when we looked at our ridership going from 5,000 people a day down to 400 or 500 at the peak of the pandemic. We could accommodate that very easily with on demand and still be flexible enough to respond to the growth when it happened, or if we even lost more ridership. So we were able to redeploy our drivers to sanitizing and bus cleaning of shelters and terminals and buses, but then implement the on-demand service by notifying the public and do it quickly. We were able to do it within 48 hours to be back out and operating a good service that was providing on-demand on our full schedule of hours from 5 a.m. until midnight. And that data that we were collecting on a daily basis allowed us to see future requests and daily requests. We still had that flexibility to be able to meet the demand or the non-demand. And the other bonus to having on-demand service was that we capped our ridership on board the bus to 10 passengers, or 10 people total. So 9 passengers and a driver. That could all be done through the app. We could set the app up or set the service up so that there were only 10 people allowed to be on that bus. So that prevented a bus driver from pulling up to a bus stop, counting to 10 and saying sorry, and having that interaction and risk of contamination by having to explain to people that we've met the cap, and just eliminates that whole frustration. It just gave us that flexibility and the ability to provide a better service with a lot less issues and hassle. And it gave us ridership data that we didn't have beforehand. It doesn't necessarily translate perfectly to a non-COVID environment. They gave us more information on where passengers were boarding and where they were disembarking, that we could start to utilize that data on our other service, fixed service, once we went back to the fixed service. It's just data that we didn't have before.
So, and from an operational cost perspective, I mean, you obviously had lost 90% of your ridership. People weren't pointing at budgets and saying we need to make cuts right away, but you were able, because you had this tool at your disposal, were you able to offset? I mean, you're obviously able to offset operational costs. What did that mean to the city? Like, what did that mean to you, to your budgets, to the city? How was that received?
It worked out really, really well, because we were, like everybody else, we had zero revenue generation because we stopped collecting fares, but we were still operating a service. Because we kept all of our staff, but redeployed them, we still had our full wage budget that we had to meet. So where we were able to save and show that savings was in fuel use. We dropped our fuel use by about 55%. We dropped our maintenance cost by about 55% because the wear and tear and the number of vehicles on the road were decreased substantially. So it allowed us to operate a service and show that we were doing it in an efficient manner and saving every opportunity that we could, so that when it come time to calculate how impacted we were, um, when we worked it out, if we were to maintain the regular service through the pandemic, we would have lost substantially more than we did. I think our overall losses were in the $2 million range for that period of the first lockdown, but could have been potentially 55% higher had we run regular service. So we were able to see substantial budgetary, I wouldn't say savings, but I would say less
Avoidance, right? It
less
was,
impact.
yeah, avoidance. And that's kind of how I look at when you first deployed the night service. It's not like you were running a full fixed route coverage for the entire city. You just went the other way. You built it up as demand increased, as opposed to structuring a fixed route network that could satisfy, you know, the access to the entire city for your ridership. And I actually never asked you this question before, but how many fixed routes do you think you would need to cover the night service? I guess it would be similar to what you run in the daytime, but maybe just a little bit reduced service. So compared to what you would have normally run in the evening, how many fixed route buses do you think you would have needed versus on demand? So
We uh, we played this scenario out not too long ago, and normally we would operate 9 buses on a fixed route during that time to cover the service schedule, and we were able to do it with 5.
yeah,
So we're able to see substantial savings still through that operating.
just through regular operation. Yeah, yeah.
And probably and one thing that we found very unique when we ended our on-demand regular service through the daytime, when our ridership numbers were climbing back up, and we needed to get back to our fixed routing, our customer service complaints increased as well, because it was no longer um, easy to book a bus. Customers had to know their schedule again. They had to know their bus arrival time and routes again. And we figure if at some point in time that the city grows sufficiently and we have to modify our evening on demand service more so that there's more fixed rate and less on demand, we're anticipating some customer pushback because it will be deemed as a decrease in service. The on demand is just so convenient for the customer that any change in that to a fixed rate schedule becomes reviewed as a backing up as opposed to a moving forward.
So, you know, as the first round of COVID restrictions eased and you started going back to normal service, you came to Pantonium and you wanted to do something a little different with the night service, right? So one of the goals of going on demand was to build support for a night service, right? Because like I said, we went the opposite direction. Instead of putting a bunch of buses out there and hoping people are going to ride it, we built up demand, and then it got to the point where maybe it was time to think about an alternative service model. So I'm going to pull up a slide really quickly just to help kind of showcase this. I'll share my screen.
Yeah, what we were finding at the end of the pandemic was that the data that we collected indicated that we had some pinch points with our on-demand service, and it was causing the use of a lot of resources at a certain point in the city to get people from one location to another. So what the data indicated was that when our industrial park and our Walmart and some of our businesses were ending service at the end of the day, the demand for service was occupying a substantial number of our buses and our resources to one specific area, going to another specific area, and removing the coverage that we had for the rest of the city. So what we were able to do is sit down with Pantonium and put together some data and some indicators to find out where the people were coming from, where they were going to, and how we could most efficiently move them and still maintain good coverage for the rest of the city. So what the data provided for us was that a lot of our people that were moving in the evening using the on-demand service were concentrated through the industrial park, and a lot over to our residential areas in the central west part of the city, where there's a number of apartment buildings and locations there. So we were able to utilize that data to put together two routes. One that would pick up our customers from the industrial park or get them to the industrial park and give them 2 points of transfer, either at our downtown terminal or at our Walmart in the north end, and carry on to the west central area of Belleville, to where most of or a lot of our ridership was at key points of time through the evening. So that allowed us to maintain our on-demand service to the rest of the city and keep that service operating, but to allow free flow and good flow of our pinch points and open that area up so that our customers could still have a reliable service to get to and from work. What we also did with Pantonium was Pantonium introduced the graining tool for us, because the concern we had was that a customer that was at a bus stop on a fixed route would attempt to book an on-demand bus from the fixed route to another stop on the same fixed route, and we would end up in that piggybacking situation. But with the graining tool that they developed, that eliminated that possibility. Passengers could book from the fixed route to anywhere in the city, or anywhere in the city to a stop on the fixed route, but not within that same fixed route. So that kept us, that allowed us to maintain that the service to the rest of the city without having that continued pinch point of service to one location. And what it's done for us is it's allowed us to maintain our full regular ridership throughout the city. But those fixed routes we're seeing are taking about a third of the pinch point service that we were having before, and spreading it more evenly across the city, so that it actually opened up almost mini hubs in 3 locations to better serve the on-demand service and get better coverage throughout the city without um, more efficiently, without wasting a lot of driver time going back and forth to the same spot in just a few minutes of time.
Yeah, I think if you look at the way the routes are structured now versus the way they were the first iteration of the fixed route on the night service, it lines up with the OD pairing data that was provided over the year and a half, 2 years that we were running on-demand service, right? And it's a route that was driven by your ridership. They decided where they wanted to go, and they told you through the use of the app, and you listened, and so there's a lot of firsts, I think, with Belleville. I think moving to citywide on-demand service is a first. I don't know about a lot of cities that were able to fully go on demand during COVID to help deal with the ridership declines and other operational concerns that people were having at the time. And you could have just stopped there, but instead we kept going, and you created a hybrid on-demand fixed route coordination strategy, which I think is also a first. We have not seen this really live in a lot of different areas because of the grains function is unique to what we have. So a lot of new things happening in Sleepy Belleville. I remember we said a long time ago that it was never really thought that anything happened after 9 o'clock in Belleville, but we kept seeing demand even after 11:30 when service was ending, right? So there was talk about maybe extending night hours or whatever to help accommodate that. But it just shows, I think, that there's a lot of potential if you give folks flexibility and convenience to determine their own trip. This is a great case study for what you can do, even when you start the program, and how it can evolve over time. Just a couple of quick questions. One person, Patrick, asks, have you considered expanding the service to daytime? Now that you have the hybrid service in place, would this be something that would work in the day to kind of, focus resources on the most common pathways, and then, use on demand for some of the outlying areas?
Absolutely, and that's something we've been looking at for a while, and COVID has actually slowed that down. But part of what we are looking at doing in the future is more of a Exactly that. We know we have lines that we're going to have to maintain as a fixed route because the demand is there and the frequency is required. But our neighborhoods, we should be able to, or planning to go into and operate vehicles that will bring the public out from the neighborhood to a almost a BRT light hub station where they can transfer and carry on from there. And what's going to be unique for us in that specific scenario is that we're going to do it as a fully inclusive neighborhood bus where our passengers that require the additional mobility needs can book door to door through the Pantonian product, and our ambulatory passengers can book bus stop to bus stop, and allow everybody to utilize the one vehicle and be transported out to a hub station where they can get onto a regular fixed rate service and go anywhere in the city, and if need to be, transferred to another service there. So it absolutely is. There are any number of flexible opportunities for on-demand to fit into, and it's absolutely going to be a regular tool in our toolbox as we move forward and make transit a little more convenient for the customer.
So I think what you're describing is a commingled hybrid fixed route on demand service. So we can keep adding more terms to the list. Someone's asking, Anna's asking, what is passenger per vehicle hour look like on the night service? When, let's talk about pre-COVID numbers. I mean, well, you can talk about whatever you want, but how many people can you move with on demand at night, or have you seen being moved? So
pre on demand, our passenger boardings per hour were in the 1 to 2 area. They were incredibly low. At the peak of our on demand pre-COVID, we were at 30 passenger boardings per hour, and we are now kind of as we make our way through COVID, we are down in the 8 to 10 passenger boardings per hour, which still during COVID is pretty outstanding. And again, that's driven by the fact that we're not driving around hoping to get somebody. We're only going there if the passenger demand is there. So it almost drives itself to increase passenger boardings per hour, because if there's no passenger requests, and we've never ever had that issue, but if there's no passenger request for the bus within 15 minutes, our buses are scheduled to return to either the terminal or the garage and sit and wait for the next call, so that they're not out just driving around using the resources that we're attempting to reserve.
John's asking, and we didn't touch on this, but what about folks that aren't technology users? How do they get access to the system?
Yeah, before we launched the service, that was a concern we had, because we wanted to maintain the service for everybody in Belleville, seniors that may not be tech savvy, individuals that aren't tech savvy. So when we launched the service, we have the app that they can utilize on a smartphone or device. We have the computer that they can utilize, and we also maintain a phone-in service. They can contact our dispatchers by phone and pre-schedule the bus to ride as well. And what we found with a number of our employers in the area that were very keen to have the ability for their employees to utilize the service is they installed tablets in driver common areas and provided training to their staff and how to utilize them, so that they were able to take part in our service as well.
So I guess that's part of the economic development side of this too. I mean, it's one of the things that I think businesses that are looking to locate to a city, they want to know what transit service looks like to the area that they're considering. What kind of conversations are you having, with businesses about this type of service? So
There were a couple of reports done by the University of Toronto and Ryerson that targeted specifically a lot of the economic development and socioeconomic impacts of our on-demand service to the city of Belleville. And they have provided details and information that our economic development team at the city of Belleville just are ecstatic with. It provides not only numbers of riders, but that whole demographic, who's riding the bus, what age category, are they workers, are they seniors, are they students, when are they riding the bus, how are they using the service. And that information allows us to work with economic development to determine how we develop our service, to make sure we're deploying and initiating services or operating services that are needed. Um, Anybody in transit industry knows that the transit's involved in everything. We're there for workers to get back and forth to work. We're there for students to get back and forth to school. We're there for just the general population to get out and do things and have that social atmosphere and social ability. So to have that data and to make sure that we are able to deploy ourselves effectively and apply ourselves as required to the people that need us the most allows us to develop a whole system and service. Now, those reports are utilized a lot through our economic development. They're utilized by our local college and our employers because now they have the data to say there are this many people in the area that we can utilize um, to make our business grow and be this much better. And the college utilizes the same data for determining how many students that the city can accommodate to attend their classes in their school. So it's from this on-demand service, it has opened up just a number of doors utilizing the data that we collect to help any number of businesses and organizations in the area to make their service better, to help us grow and get that whole symbiotic relationship and community involvement.
We have a question about the greening experience. So if someone riding, the hybrid system is trying to book a ride and they did book a trip that is covered by a fixed route, what kind of message do they see? What are they being told?
Yep. What will happen is if a customer who's or new to the service or wants to give it a try to see if they can book an on-demand bus on a fixed route to a fixed route, they get the message that to utilize the fixed route, and it prompts them to our schedule so that they can look up the service arrival time.
I also think that it's important that we maybe describe a little bit that when you're going from one service type to another service type, like from an on-demand zone to a fixed route, that it's not just dropping you off at a transfer point and saying good luck, right? It's actually trying to coordinate that drop off with the arrival of the bus, so that you're not sitting there and waiting for a half an hour, right? I mean, so what's the rider experience like? What have riders said about that type of experience?
And that's a key component because we wanted to avoid that exact situation, because after an employee works a 8, 10, 12-hour shift, gets on the bus to go home, and they know they have to make that transfer from the fixed route to the on-demand or vice versa, and it's midnight and it's cold, they want it to be as smooth as possible. And what that graining tool has allowed us to do is exactly that. When they know they have a transfer and they book that transfer, the system is set up so that it accommodates that seamlessly. The customer knows when they book that bus that it's going to be there and it's going to pick them up. And that was probably one of the fears that our customers had when we switched from the totally on-demand night service to the hybrid on-demand night service. Was again the kind of a step back, because now they've got to make that transfer. Some have to make that transfer to complete their trip, and there was the fear of just that they were going to be left stranded or standing. And working with the data and the team at Pantonium, we were able to make sure that transition is made very, very smooth. And I don't think we've missed a transfer point since we started it, unless there's been an accident that's delayed us. But again, we have that data, and the system automatically rejigs everybody as soon as something happens to make sure that service is still met. So it works incredibly well.
There's a question I think covers a little bit about the driver experience. So, there's a couple of things that come up when we're talking about on demand. One is unions. Another one is concerns about, does efficiency lead to job losses? And the third is, drivers are used to having kind of a set schedule throughout the night, and they like to kind of get around and do their route, and it's familiar and they're comfortable. What did the driver experience change? And talk about maybe a little bit about, if you can, about the conversations with the union or any impact to jobs for rolling out on demand. So
Yeah, we started right early on in the process because we knew, again, this was such a significant difference than traditional transit, that we made sure we had the union on at the table right from the beginning, so that as the progress was made and the project was developed, they were getting feedback, so they knew what was going on. And of course, as soon as you start talking about how we want this service to implement so that it is more efficient, so we can get passengers home quicker, it's human nature to start thinking cutbacks and reductions. But what we kept the message moving forward as was, we're not looking to reduce our driver complement. We're looking at making efficiencies so that we can carry more people in a quicker manner, utilizing fewer resources that will allow the drivers to be more efficient and more productive. And that's exactly what we were able to provide the drivers. They see the increased demand in their need of service. The service has only continued to grow since we launched, and it's not proving to be a practice in reducing workforce. It's proving to be a practice in reducing excess cost where we can and being more efficient. So yeah, there was always that concern of being a small town like Belleville as well. Our drivers know most of their passengers, and they get to know that routine. They get to know those people. So there was a concern that they were going to lose that. And what happened was they actually got more comfortable again, because now instead of going down the road, turning left and picking up 2 people, now we go down the road, turn right, pick up 15 people, and it's again a lot of the same people that are using the service on a regular basis. There's just more of them, so you get that comfort of knowing that you're still needed, and more so than you were before. It's more job security than job threat.
and you did mention that when periods of lower demand and a bus or number of buses are not required, you ask them to go to different points and wait. Now, how is that received? What is that? That's kind of counterintuitive. It seems you're paying somebody to do nothing, but what's your purpose for that?
Again, because we want this service to be as efficient as possible, and we're utilizing it to cut down on wear and tear in the vehicle and maintenance costs and fuel usage. um, it uh, it was difficult to get your head around, again, because it's new. And to be honest, we haven't had to take advantage of it because our buses are steadily busy. What we're seeing instead of the lack of demand is the fact that we are covering the same number of kilometers as we were on the fixed route, but carrying far more people. So it's something that was put in place to prevent unnecessary driving and wear and tear in the event that there wasn't a demand. But it's not something we regularly practice. The system has on occasion, and it's been excellent, because it is always trying to be as efficient as possible and utilize as few resources as possible. What we have seen from some of the drivers is one bus in particular, because the demand is in an area to an area, will get a lot more calls than another bus that is covering a bigger area, um, and picking up fewer people. But that's exactly what the service is designed to do. It makes everything operate as efficiently as possible and utilizes one resource as fully as possible before assigning to a second or third resource. So it does take a little getting used to it and seeing that, rather than being equitable to everybody that's on the road, it is being as efficient as possible and restricting the use of unnecessary resources. So it's a little bit different, but once it's understood, it's very easy to see why it does what it does or how it does what it does. And when we first launched the service, of course, it is autonomous and there's no need for us to be involved, but we watched it really, really closely. And it's really interesting to see how the system autonomously will section off the city to be as efficient as possible. So it will, on its own, coordinate a bus in an area and not have them piggybacking or following each other around or chasing each other across the city if there's no need to. It will actually keep that bus in a quadrant or in an area to do all the work in that area. It's pretty interesting to see.
I think we've got time for one more question, so I just want to make sure that we get to this last one. Do you feel like if Belleville had 10,000 people in a 25 square kilometer radius, do you think that would be it would be functional for on demand? What do you think about that scenario?
Absolutely, because it's adaptive. It's scaled. You can scale it up or scale it down to meet the level of demand in the area that you're covering. So maybe we wouldn't have to use as many buses. Maybe we would have to use more buses depending on the demand. It's something that would have to be looked at and pre-planned for, but it absolutely would fit any scenario. Maybe the vehicles could be different for that purpose as well, different size or more of a micro transit utilizing the on-demand. Another awesome thing about this product is you set those parameters. It's completely adjustable and adaptable to the situation. You can adjust it anything from a tandem bicycle to a double decker. It's going to fit and it's going to work. You tell it what you have and it'll make it happen.
One more quick one off the top of your head. What's the average wait time and ride time for folks on the on-demand service?
Pre-COVID, 9-minute average wait time, 12-minute average ride time. Right now, with the slight reduction in on-demand ridership, we have still probably a 9-minute wait time, but our ride time is probably down to that 9 to 10-minute ride time for on-demand as well. So
pretty happy ridership right now. Getting a almost individual taxi service. So for transit prices, right? So anyway, Paul, I really appreciate you taking the time. We thank you for always kind of leading the charge, pushing us to do better, and being an example for others who are looking at rolling something like this out in their own territory. So thanks for making time again for us, and it's great to be able to tell this kind of full circle story.
No trouble at all. It's great to be able to talk about a product that exceeded our expectations and has done more for us than we anticipated. It's been a great partnership, and we appreciate Pantonium's dedication to it. Thank you.
Well, thanks again, and we'll keep working together into the future. So,
absolutely.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining. As always, the recording will be live on YouTube within the next 24 to 48 hours. A link will be sent out, and to those that we couldn't get to your questions or comments, please feel free to send them to me directly. You can find my information anywhere on the internet and on the Pantonium's website. And I will take a look at the questions that weren't answered, and I'll try and get back to folks via email with your registration information. So again, thanks for taking time out of your day to join us for our webinar series, and stay tuned for the next session coming up next month. Take care, everybody.